Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video on what I hope to be a fairly lengthy series. I had put up a video on my channel a couple of weeks ago, kind of detailing what I was looking to do with this project, and I finally found some time to record, so hopefully I can get this out fairly quickly and get started on the next one. So if you want to know the details, you can take a look at that video. It's really short. I know I'm going to be talking enough as it is, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but essentially what I wanted to do was, because Ensemble Stars is coming up on its 10th anniversary next year, I thought it would be kind of fun to look back at a decade worth of the music they've put out for individual characters and kind of see how their vocals have progressed, both in a, time is passing and vocalists get better over time sense, and also just in terms of character, how they've been allowed to change the way they express themselves vocally throughout the years. And you might be wondering why I decided to start with Adonis. There are a couple of reasons. If you've watched my old scouting videos, you'll know that back in the dark ages, back when Ensemble Stars only had one exclamation point to its name, you didn't get to choose your starting card. You got to choose your starting unit, and then the game would randomly give you a 4-star card from the members of that unit. You couldn't reroll without deleting the game and installing it and taking a lot of time. So most people just kind of took what they got. And when I started the game, the only character I really knew was Ray, because a friend of mine was and still is a big Ray P, and is the reason I downloaded the game at all. So because he was the only character I recognized, and because looking at the units, I figured that Undead would probably have music that I would like regardless, I decided to go with them, and I got Adonis as my starter card. So he's always been kind of special to me because of that, and also because I personally just watch his voice a lot, so that was an easy choice for me. So the way this is going to go is, I was debating kind of giving commentary after every little clip and realized that would be very choppy, so I've divided it into songs. So basically there's going to be all of the featured solo parts of every song, and then I'll talk about it after. Not sure what that's going to do to the copyright machine, but from what I can tell, OnStars doesn't really care. They just kind of claim it as their music and don't do anything to your channel, and I don't make money off my videos anyway, so as long as that's all they're going to do, I don't mind too much. If it turns out to be a problem, I'm going to have to get more creative, but like I said, as it is, I'm not doing this for a profit, I'm just doing it for hopefully fandom interest and for my own interest, so we'll see how it goes. And so I've set this up mostly in chronological order. I've kind of divided it by unit songs, and then other songs that the character has taken part in, and then the solos at the end, because those are obviously the easiest ones to get a broader sense of the way that their voice works within the music. I've already talked far more than I intended to. Let's get into it. So, Melody in the Dark was the first Ensemble Stars song I ever heard, and then I listened to it on repeat for about 3 days and didn't listen to any other music from the game. So while I'm going to try my best throughout the series to not turn anything into a song review or a music review, because that's not what this is about, I'll probably have anecdotes slip in here and there because I can't help myself. Either way, Melody in the Dark does have at least a few solos for every character to kind of show off their voices and get you used to what the characters sound like. And even within this short samples, especially during the bridge portion of it, you can really hear the character that Adonis had at the beginning. And obviously these early albums, there wasn't a whole lot to go of. The voice actors would have had kind of a basic character description. There were maybe a few stories out at the time, but there wasn't much more than that. And especially initially in the beginning, Adonis was portrayed as he was very stoic. He took his job as an idol very seriously. And you can hear that in the music because it's very rigid. The timing is very strict. And especially if you compare it to some of the other vocal work in the song, his is quite distinct in that way, especially during the bridge part where the percussion actually comes in underneath his voice and you can hear that he is completely on time with it. And this is obviously a very deliberate character choice because, especially after getting into a lot of other Idol games and Idol-adjacent games, I've heard Watcha sing a lot. And this was about the same time as things like Secret Night and Leopardize were coming out, so if you are a fan of Idolish 7, listen to anything Trigger does or anything that Gaku has done, and you can hear that even though Watcha has a very distinctive tone to his voice, he does change up the way he sings based on the character that he's playing. So when he sings for Adonis, there is more of this sense of rigidity, less emotional feeling within the music, especially in these early songs, and I feel like this is a good example of that. While still obviously his tone is great, his pitch is great, everything is there, there is just very little freedom within the music for the character to express themselves. And again, I feel like that is a very intentional choice. So yeah, that's it for Honey Milk. And Honey Milk is kind of a strange song because I feel like, especially within Undead's discography, it kind of gets overlooked because it's so different from anything else that they've done. And because there's not a whole lot to talk about vocally, I'm going to talk about the song just a little bit. Because especially in terms of it being a very early Ensemble Stars song, there are a few interesting things about it. Most notably that there are meter changes. And what meter changes are is the number of beats per measure changing between the different sections of the song. So the pre-chorus and the bridge are in 3/4 time, and the rest of it is in 4/4 time. So that by itself is rather interesting. There's also some harmonies that, again, were fairly absent in early Ensemble Stars music. So vocally, the reason that it was hard to get a clip is that most of the time they're either singing in unison or they're overlapping their vocals quite a bit. So this was kind of the one time that Adonis sang for more than 2 seconds by himself. So not a whole lot to talk about in terms of his character's vocal progression, but maybe a more interesting song than people give it credit for. So Destruction Road is still kind of following the same template in terms of Adonis' singing. It's still very much rigid in time, and Destruction Road has a very driving beat, and you can hear, again, especially with the percussion and the backing tracks, his voice is very much in time with all of the drumming that's happening. He's starting to add a little bit of vibrato onto the end of his notes. So vibrato is essentially something that you hear a lot in singing. Obviously it sounds a lot like the word vibrate, but it comes from a pulsating of the larynx that wavers the pitch of a certain note, normally a sustained note. It's something that can come naturally. A lot of singers develop it just because they've been singing their entire lives. It can be trained, it can be manipulated, it can kind of be forced, but normally it sounds very strange when people try to force vibrato. But vibrato is not the same for every person, and sometimes that can also work against people in group singing, because anytime you have sound waves that are competing against each other, so if you have vibrations happening at different frequencies and they clash, you can definitely hear that. So typically with Adonis, he doesn't have a lot of vibrato to his singing. Occasionally on the end of long notes, there'll be this very kind of quick hit of rapid vibrato, which, again, hearing Watcha sing in other Idol series isn't necessarily his normal way of doing vibrato, but when we get into some of the songs where there's more vocal blending, it'll make a lot more sense as to why I think it's a good thing for Adonis's character that it happens this way within Ensemble Stars. Like Darkness 4, at least up until this point, has the longest character solos. You can hear a little bit more of the vibrato in there. You can also hear how he's switching up his tone a little bit to be a little bit lighter. It's not quite as deep within the chest voice that he's singing here, and for as distinct as his voice is, it is actually fairly versatile. He can do a lot of different genres of music just by switching how he sings, and this is something that I think gets overlooked a lot, is that the way you sing doesn't necessarily have to be the same every time. Most people are capable of creating different tones, even on the same note, depending on where kind of within their breath structure that their voice is coming from. Obviously, coming from the diaphragm or from the chest, it's always going to be a little bit stronger. If you sing more up into your nose, it's going to seem higher, even though you're still singing at the same pitch. And again, this is getting very technical, but whenever Adonis is doing slower songs or ballads, typically his voice will come up a little bit. It won't be quite as down. And it's interesting because the aspects that make his voice so distinct are still there, but it really does shift around a lot to fit more with the song that he's singing at the time, and I think that's a very underrated part of singing, and especially character singing in general. So the third albums were kind of the first time, at least for Undead, that the characters sang mini duets together. So in this case, the first one is with Kaoru. And Kaoru's voice, and this is, so many people think this is an insult, but it's not. Kaoru has a more nasal tone, and that doesn't mean that he's singing through his nose. That just means that where the sound is coming from is more up within the breath structure as opposed to further down the way Adonis tends to sing. What that also means is that when they sing together, it sounds really good because even though they're singing the same pitch, the voices are distinct enough that you can clearly hear the two different voices. And this doesn't get into it a whole lot because Kaoru doesn't sing with a whole lot of vibrato, but when you start getting into other singers that do, having someone that doesn't sing with vibrato mixed with someone that does will always sound better than two people who have competing vibrato. So if you have a singer that can control when to bring their vibrato out, it makes it a lot easier for them to sing with other people because of that. And there are, examples within other games. The one I always go back to is Mezzo from Idolish 7, where Sogo's voice actor, I have heard him sing in really, really old Cardfight Vanguard character songs. He does have natural vibrato. He basically completely gets rid of that when he sings as Sogo because Tamaki's voice actor has such a pronounced vibrato. So it sounds really good together because there is nothing competing with each other. And I said that's the most kind of obvious example I can think of. So if you ever want to listen to Mezzo's music, it's really good anyway, but that's my recommendation. This is a much lesser scale because nobody has vibratos that are that different from each other, but it is something that, even though it's very minor, can really affect the way that music sounds to the ear. And other than that, even though Gate of the Abyss, again, has a very driving beat, you can hear there's more emotion coming through in Adonis's voice. And again, I feel like that's a very deliberate choice. And it's nice to hear, especially after the first few examples where everything is so in time all the time. So Break the Prison, there isn't too much new to say in terms of Adonis himself. This is the first time we get to hear him sing with Koga. And Koga typically has a very free way of singing, especially in terms of timing and how he manipulates his voice there. There's sometimes where he gets a little bit growly, but again, Adonis's voice is so easy to blend with that I think almost anyone would sound good with him. There's some characters that I don't know if they ever would sing together. It'd be kind of interesting, but at least in terms of Undead, he sounds great with everyone. So Valentine's Eve Nightmare is kind of the first entry into Undead's swing discography, which gets quite a bit bigger as the years go on. It's also the first time he gets to sing with Rei, and Rei, like Koga, is very free with his singing. In music, we would call it rubato, which essentially means free time, and it kind of means slowing down and speeding up the melody to fit within the time structure, but not necessarily be exactly on beat all the time. So basically the opposite of what Adonis tends to do. But again, their voices do blend very well together tonally, so it still ends up working quite well. Otherwise, at the end of the last line, you can hear more of that really tight vibrato coming in. Watch's voice, again, is very suited, I would say, to this style of music, and we'll get a little bit more into that as time goes on, but let's keep going.
か弱き瞳の奥に嘘つきなバッテリーそのままで飛び込んで
I always forget about the anime ending songs for some reason, maybe because they're not kind of part of any other grouping of songs, they're not from an album or anything, but Adonis actually sings far more in Immoral World than I thought he would. We get the little duet with Kaoru again, and this is something else that Adonis tends to do because his voice is so easy to blend with. Normally he kind of takes the under part of it. You can hear that Kaoru's voice is more pronounced in the mix, and Adonis's voice is there to support what the other singers are doing, which again is a very important role, especially when you're talking about blending voices together. The ending part, I feel like that's kind of the first time he's been allowed to actually belt a little bit, and it's nice to see the progression, even though the anime, from what I remember, it's been many years since I watched it, Adonis wasn't featured that heavily. Vocally, this is a much more advanced Adonis than the one that, you know, existed at the beginning of Ensemble Stars, and you can already hear that.
平を焦がすオレンジの炎傷のない魂のまま世自由を奪おう君でしか生きることのできないものを
So now we're into Ensemble Stars with 2 exclamation points. Again, Nightless World, fairly common for the type of music that Undead sings. You can hear a little bit more with the duets, a little bit more how he's supporting the other vocalists. There's some more harmonies happening. Nothing too different in terms of how he's singing in anyway, but again, kind of nice to hear, especially longer duets that are starting to happen between the characters at this point.
これ以上は決して許されない
So Forbidden Rain is kind of a strange one to me because for an event that he was the 5-star in, I feel like he should have more of a feature on the song, but he really only has those 3 parts. But there is a lot to talk about there. I also find it interesting that both of Adonis's 5-star events have been kind of more into the jazz/swing side of things as opposed to the rock side of things. But like I said before, his voice is well suited to that. So these solos are still interesting because, especially the latter 2, the middle one, you can hear he gets to sing with a little more expression. He actually gets to hold some sustained notes with no vibrato, which shows that it is something that he is consciously doing when he sings. The last one especially, though, this is the first time, I believe, that Adonis has been allowed to go into falsetto, and it might actually be the only time, but he has a very strong falsetto, and I wish they'd let him do it more often. I assume it's more of a character choice than anything, because Watcha can obviously sustain those falsetto notes very well. But it's nice to hear here, especially at a time when the music kind of drops out, so you get to just hear his voice, and I'm glad that it happened, even though I wish that he would have gotten more for a song that ostensibly he's supposed to be the featured soloist in.
染められた場所でその瞳はもう落ちる愛の底で
So I don't have a whole lot to say about Savage Love Affair because I don't think there's much here that's happening that hasn't happened in other songs. We get some solos, we get a little bit of a duet part with Ray. It is interesting in the last part again, we're back to Adonis being paired with the percussion, which happens a lot more than I thought it did. Even though he's showing more expression in these latter songs, you can still always count on him to be precisely on time when you need him to be, and I think, again, they will always kind of fall back on that when they have to.
片三つのコードつなげて歌ってはオフラージュしてた音で器用でもまっすぐな音のままで
So I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not. In the last few years, I've kind of been enjoying Ensemble Stars on my own without looking at too much of the fandom opinion. I love Sustained Memories, even though it is, again, far different from the rest of Undead's discography. They all sound really good, and I think it's, again, an example of how, even though these units kind of have their niche in terms of genre, A lot of these singers are versatile enough to make almost anything work. And you can hear, especially with Rei and Koga here, how much softer both of them are singing as well. And softer, I don't mean in volume, but in terms of, the way that their voice sounds. It's much more toned down. There's not really these kind of vocal growls or snarls or things that can happen within the rock songs. And the voices still blend so well together. After hearing Watcha sing more ballad-like songs in other series, I know he's very capable of it, and I think this shows it off very well. You can hear his tone shifting even within the singular words, where the first part will be very kind of low in the rich, deep part of his chest voice, and then he'll pop up a little bit more into the higher tone in the second part of the word. So, again, it shows a lot of control, and I think songs like this that are slower show off the vocal capabilities of the voice actors a lot more when they're singing.
残酷がしないほどの記憶が叫ばせ落とすように腕と流れ込む
So these next couple of songs are interesting, mostly because of the tone that he's using. So in this one, even though some of the notes are a little bit higher, and even though there are some sections where the music cuts out entirely, he stays almost completely within the deepest part of his chest voice for the entire song, which a lot of the other songs as I mentioned before, you'll kind of hear him going in and out. This one stays almost completely down the entire time. And compare that to the next one. So with the exception of that very last part of Mermaid, he stays very up the entire time. So comparing those two is really interesting because you can hear kind of how stable his tone is regardless of which part of his breath structure he's using at the time. I also wanted to point out in this one, the first duet with Koga in this, I'd say, is even more growly than usual. But again, you can hear the balance between their voices still works really well because of how adept Adonis's vocals are at blending with pretty much anyone else. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next section. But we've got one more purely undead song to go through, and then we'll get into everything else.
いつもよりもドレスアップして街灯に照らされてる君手を取りキスをするついてしまう衝動はまるでバラニリア王と愛それは今夜がアンティークなストーリーにしたいなら新書にスイングさせよう恐ろしいほど
Alright, so we've got the second Adonis featured event where he was the 5-star, and I feel like this is a much better feature of his voice than Forbidden Rain was. Once more, they've kind of gone into the swing jazz side of things for the song, but it shows off his voice very well. He's going back to what he did in previous songs where there's a lot of tone switching between the different sections. Interestingly, with the duet part with Rei, they're both singing kind of in the upper part of their tone, where normally they would diverge a little bit to kind of bring out both parts, but I think it works again because the music mostly cuts out, and they sound very similar in that section, which is kind of neat because it's not something we've heard their voices in particular do before. The other thing with this is that his vibrato is more pronounced when he has the solo vocal lines, probably because when you're singing longer solo parts by yourself, you don't need to worry about clashing with anyone else, so it's coming out a little bit more. But overall, I think it's a very good feature for his voice. Obviously, it's the last thing we have heard up until this point, so you can already start to see the progression within the Undead songs. And next, we're going to start looking at anything that's not purely Undead, and then we're going to finish with the solo. So let's keep going. So Perfectly Imperfect, a lot of these kind of cross-unit songs, especially the ones that have bigger units, the individual characters don't get a whole lot of features just because there are so many voices they have to fit in there. He's got a couple in here. He's got one with Soma at the beginning, which I wish was longer because I feel like their voices work really well together, and you can't hear a whole lot of it there. But Soma, I don't want to spend too much time on other characters in an Adonis video, but Soma to me sings like a musical theater actor. His vowels are very open, and I haven't spoken about it a lot before, but Adonis tends to enunciate his words very clearly. So those two coming together, I think, would make something that's very easy to listen to, because you would be able to understand everything that's happening. So, and also just because of the fact that their characters are such close friends, I wish that they had more time to actually sing together, but at least we get that. He also gets to sing a little bit with Kuro here, and Adonis and Kuro both have fairly low voices, which I think I mentioned earlier. Sorry, I had to take a break from recording yesterday because the other people in my house came home, so this is me picking it up the next day and trying to remember what I said. But low voices typically are easy to blend together, so generally they're going to sound good, and they only have like one line, but I think they do sound good in that one. So the cover series songs are interesting, a lot of them because they don't take themselves very seriously. I mean, USA is just a fun song. I enjoy listening to it just because it's silly for the most part. So there's nothing profound about the vocals. The one thing I wanted to highlight here is that the member of Crazy Bee that Adonis sings with in both choruses is Nikki, and so far from all of the people we've heard sing with Adonis, Nikki is the one, I would say, whose voice is the furthest away in terms of tone. Nikki has a very high voice comparatively to Adonis. So even though you have these two really short sections, you can still hear again that when you have a higher tone and a lower tone, typically they do sound good together. Again, Fist of Soul, there's not a whole lot. He has a couple of solo lines and then, a few different duets. We have Kuro again, who we already talked about. June and Madara are their voices aren't particularly similar, but they are both higher than Adonis. And every time June sings, I'm surprised at how high his voice is, which you'd think after all these years I would know what his voice sounds like. Somehow I never do. But again, kind of like I said with Nikki, when you have voices that are far apart from each other, they will typically sound good together because it's easy to hear both of them. There's also that rap section in the middle of the song, and I personally find it strange that Kuro doesn't get a part in that, considering, his voice actor is in Hypnosis Mic and all of that. But the thing that I like about the mix in it is they kind of have this blending of, it's like a double voice blending. They have a really low vocal part and then a higher one that the same character does that are played at the same time as each other. So it creates this really neat effect that's not done with electronics. Again, it's just done with using your voice in different ways. So I think, regardless of how I feel about them throwing rap into a bunch of songs these days in OnStars, I do like that part of it. You can do some really neat things with the style because of it. So that takes care of all of the non-solo songs, because at least when I'm recording this, which is November 2024, Adonis hasn't had his second shuffle unit yet, and he hasn't been in any of those 9 series songs, the ones that don't get music videos but that get released every month. So obviously there's going to be more songs past this, but this is as far as I can go with it. So next up are the solos. So I know from what I've seen, a lot of people do prefer the second solos overall in terms of character development, lyrics, things like that. Personally, when I listen to music, I mostly rate songs on how much I actually like listening to them as opposed to the lyrical content of them, which can help, but if I don't enjoy the way the song sounds, no matter how good the lyrics are, I probably won't like it very much. That being said, I think Sakura Faith is a much more interesting song, vocally and musically, than Burning Body, particularly because it's not really something that OnStars has done before, and, obviously trying to relate it to Adonis's character. But there are a lot of things in it that are very technical that might not seem as difficult as they actually are to do, because Adonis just sings so well that it sounds easy. The one thing I want to focus on is in the bridge there is a chromatic section, and chromatic in music is basically the smallest audible pitch change between two notes, which isn't exactly true. There are tones that are in between that you can get into, which is why instruments go out of tune, because they can kind of slide off of the very middle of certain pitches. But essentially, if you wanted to play what's called a chromatic scale, you would play every single note on the piano or every single fret on a guitar. And please excuse my bad piano phone app because my piano is not in the room with me right now, but essentially a chromatic scale sounds like this. Which you can hear in the bridge when he's singing that part. And what makes it difficult is that the pitches are so close together that in order to be accurate, your ear has to be fairly good to hit everything exactly where it needs to be, especially when you're singing these notes in succession. And I have not had any personal experience with this because I have never been to Japan, but people that I know have been to voice actor concerts and have basically said that Wacha is on from the second the show starts. He doesn't need any time to warm up. He sounds exactly the same as he does in recordings, which to me implies that he has a very good ear for music and probably finds it easy to differentiate those pitches, which makes it a lot easier to sing them as well. The other thing I wanted to mention with this song in particular is that it is in a minor key, particularly a harmonic minor key, which I always find more interesting to listen to in music because it doesn't pop up as often. And a harmonic minor scale would sound like this. So you can hear that sound of it, especially the sound of the last few higher notes of the scale. You can hear that a lot within the backing track and within the music itself. So, like I said, in terms of the song structure, there are a lot of interesting things going on here, and obviously the vocals are great. Alright, so contrary to what I said before, I don't dislike Burning Body at all. It is a very standard rock song. There's nothing particularly innovative about the backing track, although I do notice that both in this one and I think in the other Undead songs that come into this full album that came out, someone in the music production team has discovered the slap bass and is using it a lot, which is interesting if only because I don't think that ever happened in their songs before. But other than that, you know, it's a very typical 4/4 standard rock song. The most interesting part about it is his vocals, which is not a bad thing. He gets probably more growly than I think we've ever heard him in any other song, and especially at the end, the very final note there. Typically, when Adonis has sustained notes, he will either just kind of fade out the note or he'll do the vibrato at the end. This time he actually kind of pushes the end of the note to make it a little bit louder and kind of get that extra breath onto it, which is not something he's done before. So as a vocal showcase, I think it does show off some parts of his voice that are different to what he's done before. So that, to me, shows that there's a lot more to see with Adonis, and I'm curious to see where it will go in the future. The only other thing I wanted to note about this is that I know I talked about before how typically Adonis and the percussion come in together because his singing is very rhythmic. In this one, he actually sings against the drums in the second line of the chorus. So you have the drum beat that's going, and I don't know if this is going to come through on the recording. I hope it does. So the drum beat is doing this. His voice is doing da 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 da. So he's actually not on beat. And another thing I find very interesting in music is when it goes into that syncopation or that offbeat, because one, it's harder to sing or play something that's not keeping with the beat of the song, but it also sounds more interesting. So it's kind of the exact opposite of what he was doing in the early songs. And that brings us to the end. I hope this was interesting and that I didn't ramble too much and that I wasn't entirely incoherent, because I am kind of afraid that that's what might have happened. I was planning on at the beginning kind of giving my initial, this is what I think we're going to see, and then at the end coming back to this is what we did see or hear, as the case may be. And I completely forgot because that's something I do a lot. But what I wanted to say was that my initial impression was that we would just get to see more of his voice as the series went on, that it was very reserved in the beginning and he'd eventually be able to show off more of what he could do. And that's pretty much what happened. At this point, I would say he's using basically the full range of his voice. And I know there's more things that Watcha can do that wouldn't necessarily fit Adonis's character, even, with him being more expressive and showing more of himself now, but I think they're utilizing his voice much more effectively than they were at the beginning, and that's nice to see. So my question to you is, coming into this, what did you think you were going to hear, and was it what you expected in the end? It was really fun to do. This took much longer than I thought it would to actually get everything together, so if I am going to continue this, please like, comment, do all the other things that the algorithm prefers, because, like I said, I make no profit off of these videos, obviously, so if it's something that I'm going to devote my time to, it'd be nice to know that people are interested in watching and all of that. And if you have a character that you would like to see, feel free to leave it in the comments. Like I said, I don't know if I'll be able to get to everyone, because this is a very involved project, but I would like to do as many as I can, or at least touch on as many units as I can. Next up, at the beginning I was trying not to do two of the same unit back to back just to get some variety in the music, but the friend I had talked about earlier, the one that was the reason I got into Ensemble Stars, requested that I do Ray, and because I would not be in this series at all without him, I'm going to do Ray next. Which is a character I was probably going to do anyway, because I love Masun's voice. He does a lot of very interesting things with Ray, especially considering the differences between Ray's kind of earlier character and his present day character and how that's reflected within the song. So I think Ray will be very interesting to look at. In any case, so that's what's happening next, but if there is anyone else you would like me to cover, as I said, please drop a comment. Thank you for watching and listening, and yeah, I'll see you next time.